Hello, folks, and welcome to our presentation today, Cloud 101, What It Takes to Move to the Cloud. Our presenters today are Dave Bailey, President, and Phillip Jackson, CIO of Arctic IT. We've designed this content with a non-technical professional to understand why technology is important to everyone. This is a particularly fun presentation where we go back to basics and teach you the concept of the cloud and provide a step-by-step roadmap to cloud migration. If you have a question, please put it in the chat window and we will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Dave.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. Hopefully this Thursday afternoon finds you happy and healthy and safe wherever you might be located. As you know, the world has changed as we know it, and cloud has become a little bit bigger part of a conversation than I think most people were prepared for, and I think most people had a general understanding of what cloud was. But over the past month and a half, 2 months, we've gotten a tremendous amount of inquiry from non-IT professionals about the cloud and how it relates to business. Most people's understanding of the cloud, it really boils down to what they associate with backing up their phone, or maybe they know that their IT department uses the cloud in some capacity, but they really don't have a depth of knowledge from what we would consider just the foundational basics of the different types of cloud services that are out there and how they relate to something we can all be familiar with. So we're going to dive into a little bit of an analogy and a basic understanding of what we call Cloud 101 to help the non-IT professional have that depth of knowledge, so that as these conversations start to evolve in their business, they have the ability to relate and have a better understanding. Okay. So we're going to talk about an analogy with the cloud, a little bit about the definition of what cloud needs from an IT perspective. Then we're going to talk about the ways that a business organization can move their assets into the cloud, give you a couple real world examples, and then talk about what that new modern workplace is in the context of a Microsoft workplace. We specifically focus on the Microsoft stack, and we want to give you some ideas on how product relates to the different types of cloud that we teach you about today. So I think first of all, from a marketing perspective, over the years, cloud became a place to put something. It became kind of a destination, and with a visual representation of the cloud, it's an interesting discussion because my stuff's no longer here, it's over there. But the truth of the matter is cloud is a capability. It's not just a destination. And a few months back, I had to have a conversation with my father and explain to him that it was kind of comedy. Dad, the cloud is on the ground, right? So why do they call it the cloud? It was just something someone in their mid 70s didn't quite get. Why is the cloud on the ground? Really, it's your computer resources that you used to have in your business placed in someone else's data center so that they can scale and you can leverage them in a different location, so you don't have the infrastructure any longer inside your space. So what makes the cloud an interesting opportunity for business? Well, it's easy. It's inexpensive to set up. So there's no more hardware costs, application licensing from a perpetual licensing or capital investment perspective no longer exists inside your infrastructure if you move that to the cloud. That would be a capital expense to an operating expense, and depending on what kind of business you're in, that could make a big deal for you as far as your financials. It scales to your needs. You only really pay for what you need. Not that this is a Liberty Mutual car insurance commercial, but you pay for what you need. So you don't have to buy this big of a server because you might need that much in 3 years and you want to make the investment. You can start out with this much compute power and then grow as you need it. You pay by the drink. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Maintenance is done for you in many components of that, depending on the type of cloud model you use. And then there's things like fault tolerance, where there's backup hardware, and there's geo redundancy, where I might be in one data center here where I usually work out of, but if anything happened here, it's also replicated in another geography so that I really wouldn't have any downtime, and if I did, it would be minimal. Along the bottom of this slide, you'll see that we have just a quick linear image. All of us in our homes are on the right-hand side, number 8, and there's 2 orange bars there. You'll see that all the way over to number 1, power is generated, electricity is generated. It is converted and decoupled so that it can be transported across those big, huge wires that you see, those high tension lines. And then it comes into basically a transfer station where that energy is then trickled down a little bit further so that it can go out across the smaller wires that get out to your house. And then from there, it hits a transformer out at the beginning of your development, your street, or wherever you are, and it becomes condensed down even further so that it goes into 110 or 220 to be used inside your home. And all you have to do is be in number 8 and pay your electric bill. And you get metered for how much you use. If you go back in history, back into the manufacturing days before electricity was in people's homes as a commodity to just turn on and turn off, that expectation of electricity as a service was vastly different. Okay. So here you'll see that that's actually the equivalent of the power plant that you would have had inside your building. So these are the generators that outside the building is a steam engine burning fuel. Back in the day, it was coal. In most cases, coal or kerosene oil, and that engine was turning this turbine, and it was creating electricity. Every single manufacturing facility had one of these power closets in its building, and they were responsible for generating the electricity they needed to run their business. And then not too long ago, a few hundred years, up here in Troy, New York, one of the guys that had a wagon wheel out there on the river that was generating electricity for his plant. So he wasn't using coal, he was using water to actually turn a wheel to generate electricity in his plant and subsidizing that with a coal-fired plant. He ended up saying, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up a couple of these and generate enough electricity, and I'm going to start selling it to the places next to me. And that's a long story short, of course. If you ever read the book, The Tipping Point, it's a real good book, and it talks about how electricity as a service became a thing. Down in the bottom, you'll see here that's the Edison Electric Lighting Station in New York City. It's an artist rendering, of course. But there is a significant number of electricity generating what they called dynamos back then. And that is how electric light was provided to the cities, to the city blocks inside New York City. So modern electricity has a very similar story to the evolution of the cloud. And most people don't have that analogous, relationship to electricity. On the right-hand side here, you'll see that we have a server room, a server closet for a small to medium-sized business. Wires all over the place, batteries, servers, backups, drives, storage, everything. And they're able to take out that whole room and then put that into the equivalent of the modern electricity plant, which is a data center. That picture on the bottom right is an actual photo of a Microsoft data center, of which there are 13 or 14 inside the contiguous United States. And that is what a server room looks today. All right, so just a little bit of an understanding of electricity to cloud for compute power. Very similar story, very similar path. So let's talk about the public cloud. The public cloud is an example of where we can go up and get software as a service. Any type of business can go up there and consume those services. There are different availability, different costs, different models. There's multiple providers. And then there's something called private cloud. Private cloud would be an example of when I had that power plant inside my office and I had my storage closet, and that's where I had all my services running. that was my own private power plant. So if I had my own server infrastructure, that was really my own private cloud. I might have had a few different locations patching into it. My business campus might have had several different buildings, but I was centrally locating power or centrally locating compute, right, and giving it out there. So that's private cloud. Then we have hybrid cloud, which is common for a lot of the businesses today, maybe even some of you that are attending, is that I'm going to use a little bit of cloud resources and I still have some on-premise resources that I require. And there might be a business reason. You might be in the medical profession or the hospital industry where you need to have that on-premise compute power because God forbid you lost internet or you lost power, you still needed access to those critical systems that you needed to get data from. So you might use a combination of both your own private cloud internally to your business and some public cloud, maybe backing things up, okay? And then there's multi-cloud. There are many businesses today that will have some resources in Azure. They'll use some Microsoft 365 for operating system and Office 365 type stuff. And they might actually have some Microsoft Dynamics business applications like a CRM or an ERP solution, accounting solution. Those are 3 different clouds at Microsoft. So you could say you're multi-cloud. And then you can go out of that brand, if you will, which Microsoft is a brand of cloud, and you might have some stuff in AWS, you might have Google, you might have IBM, you might have a couple different providers depending on the type of business that you're in. So there's 3 types of cloud service that you need to be familiar with. And just like anything else inside the IT world, we use a lot of acronyms. Sometimes we make them up as we go. I admit it, I've done that a few times over my career. But these are some pretty standard ones that you need to be familiar with from a 101 type perspective. Software as a service, or SaaS, SaaS. Business applications, Office 365. I pay a monthly subscription. I get Excel, Outlook, Word, PowerPoint. I get to use it either on my mobile phone, on my PC. I can install it on up to 5 devices. It's software as a service. And then you look at maybe your banking application or your outsourced payroll application, right? I log into a web portal, I get on there, I'm using the software as I'm working with it in a browser, I log out, I'm done. That is banking as a service delivered through a software application or software as a service. So that's typically the least amount of overhead where almost everything is provided to you by the cloud provider, and all you need is a username and login and a device to get to it. And that's usually in any time, anywhere, any device. So whether it's a mobile phone, a tablet, or a PC, I can get there. Then we have platform as a service. So that's known as Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services or AWS. That's where I'm going to say I want things like a database application, I want a web application server, and I want to host some business applications where not only the server licensing and the database licensing, but the actual hardware itself are all provided as part of that platform as a service, PaaS. An example of that is you might have an infrastructure requirement for an e-commerce solution because you sell online. You might want to use Azure Platform as a Service to host your database, your web application servers, and even that web front end that's going to face your customer. You might use Platform as a Service. And then the last one is Infrastructure as a Service. And that's common for a lot of small to medium-sized businesses who move to the cloud for that first time, if you will, where they have on-premise infrastructure, they need to move it to the cloud because they can't support it there, but they might have unique business requirements where they want to actually specify, this is the type of server that I need, this is how much RAM, how much storage, what kind of growth, what kind of backup. So that's more of an a la carte type. I want to have my own infrastructure and my own crafted hardware solution in someone else's cloud, and I'll use infrastructure as a service. And that's also provided by an Azure or an AWS, a Microsoft or an Amazon, okay? Fundamental differences between on-premises hardware solutions and software versus cloud subscription. And this is just something to keep in mind when you're saying, okay, why would I want to consider, as a non-IT professional, if I want to be able to go to IT and say, hey, I think I found a way for us to save on expense, get things done faster, utilize resources in a different way, have better reliability, have a different capability to manage, and have some fault tolerance, redundancy, and security in my business. Well, those are all things that you would want as a non-IT professional for any application or tool that you were required to use. So for example, capital expense we talked about, where if I don't have to put physical devices here in my building, I'm not spending $10, $20, $30, $40,000 for server infrastructure and everything else I need. I'm just paying by the drink in someone else's data center without all the additional overhead that I might require for my own on-premise stuff. Now, your IT person, and this still happens quite a bit today, would typically, they'd be a little alarmed by this. It's like, well, if you take all that infrastructure out of my physical space that you're paying me to manage for you, and you put that up in the cloud, well, you just took my job away. You don't need me anymore. It's actually not the case. It just changes the job description and the strategic value of that IT resource. They now have to manage those cloud resources, but they're going to do it for less of a cost with all of these other perks by moving it up there. And they're able to strategic on the value of technology to you as an end user or your customer or your business versus the day-to-day grind of patching, securing, repairing, replacing that on-premise hardware that they typically have, that typically occupies most of their time, right? So I'm not going to go through each one of those, but one of the keys here is that if you go with like a Microsoft application, for example, in the business cloud, 99.95% uptime. I don't know about you, but when we used to have all of our eggs in a basket in an on-premise environment, none of those eggs were ever up 99.95% of the time. They weren't. We couldn't keep that kind of redundancy. We could not afford that. Even as a small business that was in the IT space, that kind of uptime is really hard to put out there, right? So how has the cloud affected business, and really what do we see from that perspective from an industry point of view? Well, you can imagine how quick, and everybody's aware of the Industrial Revolution and how electricity being distributed to business allowed them to grow quicker, build faster, all that stuff. I'm hoping we see some kind of new industrial revolution in the United States here under current circumstances and bringing more of our manufacturing back into our country, which is great to see. And how will we be able to do that? Well, business at scale with a dependency on technology can only do that today if the cloud is used. So I want to use a data center's compute, storage, security, and everything else that it provides at a lower expense with a higher availability so that I can focus my dollars and my investment in my business in other places. These statistics were prior to COVID-19. Public cloud will grow another 17% worldwide in 2020. I think that number now is estimated to be 34% in my research yesterday, but couldn't really substantiate that and where those numbers came from. I'm sure somebody that's in the cloud services provider market grew that number a little bit, right? So statistics can be slightly misleading. However, one thing that's really clear is you'll see here that as software as a service application services themselves, that is one of the largest segments where people are saying, I don't need that server infrastructure to install software on my computers and all that stuff. All I need is a device with a browser. I just want to log in securely and use the software, log out when I'm done. Boom, that's it. That's how it works. That still remains one of the largest sections of the cloud services market. And you'll see things like payroll as a service, even something like a QuickBooks, which is an accounting system for small businesses. It's all cloud-based today, right? It's all cloud-based. And you can see a little bit more on this if you want, the public cloud advantage at arctic-it.com. That's a blog that is contributed to by a bunch of different people within our company. And that last blog was done by Phil Jackson, our CIO. Now, we've talked about things as a service. And if any of you have ever seen any of the Rube Goldberg type setups with dominoes and doors swinging shut and missiles getting fired off and all different types of stuff that he's built over the years, I mean, there is literally a drawing for a napkin as a service where and of course we're using this as a parody, but mapping out anything as a service is possible. I got an advertisement yesterday from the True Green ChemLawn folks, and that's, yard fertilizer and pesticide control as a service. I pay a monthly fee. I pay it all 12 months. They come, they take care of my grass, all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't actually subscribe to that service. I've never quite found the value in it, but there's plenty of people that do. So you can get yard, landscaping as a service, right? That's something we're all familiar with. You can pay for the month now instead of paying, you can pay all throughout the year, so you're not just paying in the months that you use it. So there is steps to move to the cloud, and anything can be provided as a service today, as we're seeing. Just think about Netflix. Started out as CDs as a service, and now it's a lot more than that, right? So what does cloud migration look like? So this is our version of the Rube Goldberg. We have a 9-step process, and that's what we want to talk to you about. All right, so when we get approached by a customer that says, hey, we need to move to the cloud, it's okay, well, what are your priorities? What's causing you to make that request? Can we take a small piece? Do you need to take a big bite out of it? What is the business catalyst? So I'm going to go through what those 9 steps are and give you some examples of how we work in that capacity. All right, so let's explore the steps of cloud migration. So first thing we want to do is we want to discover what a customer's on-premises footprint looks like. Now, this is one diagram. This is a relatively, it looks like it's got a lot of moving parts to it, believe it or not, but even a small business has all of these components in its cloud, in its on-premise infrastructure right now as we speak. It might not be as diverse. It might not have all of the different details in there, but a small business on average will have this complex of a business environment. So we go in, we document the users. What's the use case, the business need? Is there something we can do SaaS? Do they have something in line of business unique where we have to move that infrastructure to an Azure? Servers, workstation devices, how are they secured? How are they patched? Do they have dependencies on other pieces of software or integrations to other things inside their business? For example, a manufacturer might have really unique manufacturing pick, pack, and ship software, controlling their machinery on their manufacturing floor. And that software is not connected to the accounting application or the sales or CRM application. But if it is connected and you move one piece, what does that do to the infrastructure? So we have to go in there and document what those business requirements might be. Then there's also compliance and regulation. If you're a retailer, for example, or you're in the casino industry, you might have a gaming commission that has regulations on what needs to be local, what can be in the cloud. You might have credit card processing regulations for how you have to store and manage. Everybody has those. That's called PCI compliance, right? And then we have to look at business impact with or without the cloud, and what's the financial impact with or without the cloud. Just because you could move it to the cloud doesn't mean you necessarily have to. Now, we might sound a little cloud brainwashed, right? It's our business, but you might have made a recent investment inside some local infrastructure, and you don't necessarily want to get rid of that. It might still have a good 3-4 year runway on it. But you might have a security requirement that you might take a piece of that and move it to a SaaS application in the cloud, and you can keep some of your infrastructure on premise. You made an investment there. So what's the business and or financial impact? We have to evaluate that and document it so it's part of the decision criteria. Then we have to map the dependencies and determine what kind of cloud resources you might be able to use for the things we elect. This is actually a drawing that we had to do for someone that moved their retail e-commerce solution that was on-premise. They had a whole bunch of server infrastructure, a bunch of virtual machines where we actually have multiple servers inside one physical server. That's a whole nother webinar. But the way that this works is they said, okay, we can no longer guarantee the security of our e-commerce platform. We have customers submitting credit cards, we have customer information, PII, personal identifiable information, right? Address, phone number, email, contact information. We have to make sure that that's not only more secure, but we have to have additional layers of security, and we also have to mitigate some of that risk. So we had to take a look at, okay, well, here's your existing infrastructure. Let's make sure we have a good layout and map of that, because we are going to move these pieces up into partially some SaaS technology, as well as some Azure network infrastructure. We did a little bit of both. So that's an example of one drawing, okay? So then we get into, okay, what is the workload and cost modeling? Believe it or not, you can go out, and if you're not technical, which you shouldn't be if you're attending this Cloud 101, the same way you might want to pick out a new car or do some shopping on Amazon.com, and you might have a product configurator where you can say, I want to pick the blue one, I want to have this trim package, I want to have this kind of engine because that's the kind of power that I need. Maybe it's a simple car, I don't need much power, it can be, you know, just get me from point A to B. Those configurable options that you have when you want to purchase something is exactly how you can purchase your infrastructure in the cloud. So I have here a screenshot of something called the Azure Calculator. The Azure Calculator. AWS has a similar thing as well. I have two callouts. You'll notice that I need to take a server from my on-premise environment and I want to put it up in the cloud. Okay, well, what do I want it to do? I want to pick the region. I want to say what operating system is on it. I want to say what kind of machine. Is it standard? Is it enterprise? Is, you know, so maybe more of my compute power. If I'm really going to put a big workload on this, I might want an enterprise class machine versus a standard business machine. But just a standard server like I'd have in a normal small to medium sized business with 8 cores. So if you know anything about your workstation that you're on right now, your laptop or your computer, the amount of RAM, the amount of storage, all that kind of stuff. When we're building out a computer and you open up the case on that physical computer, it's got all these pieces in it. Well, here, if you remember my earlier picture of that data center, I'm just carving out a spot down that long hallway of compute power, storage, and memory. And if I want to get an 8-core server with 56 gigs of RAM and 112 gigs of temporary storage. That means storage that I'm going to use while I'm using the service that I can offload to other cheaper storage as I don't need it. I get to dial all that up with my operating system on it already, so there's licensing built in for 82 cents per hour. 82 cents per hour. And how would I calculate how much time I needed that? Well, if I go out there for the number of minutes in a day, number of hours in a week, and I want it to run 24/7, 7 days a week, all the time, I can say that I want to reserve that for 1 year in advance. I can get a 57% discount versus just paying by the minute I use it. Pay as you go is one way. 1 year reserved makes it a little bit cheaper. A 3-year reserve makes it even less expensive with a 71% discount. I get to say that I want the operating system license included. I put all that together. I want to use solid state drives versus regular spinning disks. Those are still options. Those are starting to go away. Solid state drive means that, for anybody that's not familiar, this little chip right here, which is the size of my fingernail, right? This little chip, this holds 256 gigs of data, the size of my fingernail. 256 gigs of data now on that little tiny chip, right? So I want to create my storage. That's an example, by the way, of solid state media. And then I want to say how big my disks are. Do I want a snapshot for backups? Snapshots means that the cloud provider is going to take pictures of my data as I use it to make sure that if I ever need to go back, say to an hour ago, a day ago, I have that snapshot to pull my data forward if I want, just to back up any kind of transactional information I have. All of that fault tolerance, redundancy, licensing, storage, compute power, all of that, $600 a month. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an understanding. Right here at step 3, I'm taking a physical server that likely would have cost me anywhere from 7 to 10 grand. That's not including backup technology, a battery backup, the energy that is used to run that server in my space. And I just moved that into an Azure workload for Microsoft's cloud for $600 a month. So that just gives you an idea of the expense versus the effort and the cost to move to the cloud, right? Then we get into what's that cloud migration strategy and plan. And then we also have to look at some more of the SaaS options. Now, again, we're a Microsoft shop. That's where we focus most of our efforts. But if I look at the difference between SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, right? So software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. I just showed you an Azure example. That would be platform/infrastructure as a service. Now let's talk about software as a service, for example. Now we have to look at the cost of storage. So most of us as small businesses that haven't moved to the cloud would have our file and print server. You might remember your user drive, your shared drives, your map drives where you store your yellow folders. You go out there, create a new yellow folder, play yellow folder file hockey, just moving stuff around, just crashing it out there, storing all your stuff, right? All right. Well, that storage costs something to your business. And the more crap you put out there, the more storage you need. So if you're in a company that has 20, 30, 40 folks, or 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 employees that's storing content, regardless of the size, you can imagine how that grows. Some of us have been at this a long time. Think about what 20 years of content stored in your U drive looks like, right? You go out to a Microsoft 365, which is now the product name. It used to be called Office 365. It's now called Microsoft 365. Automatically, if you go with the Business Premium Edition just for cost differential, you'll notice that you have a terabyte per user. That's 1,000 gigs of storage, and that costs your business $20 a month. And the terabyte of storage per user is included in addition to all of the security tools and Microsoft Office applications that you need, including all of your email for $20 a month. And as another example, Paychex is who we use for our payroll service provider. So a lot of our clients use some type of third-party payroll service provider. That's another example of, instead of having payroll software here local on my machine, I can use a third-party provider. I get a portal to go into. I pay per employee. Everything's out there, and even the employee has the ability to log in, get their earnings statements, get their pay statements, whatever they need, anytime they want it. And I take all of that responsibility and risk out of keeping that personal information safe here. And I'm paying somebody like a Paychex to provide not only the data processing and the workload, but I'm also paying them to help secure that data as well. Okay. All right, now we want to prepare the environment. So we've taken a look at what we want to move. We've taken a look at the costs of how we want to move and why. This is an example of, I'm standing up something called the Azure portal, and I'm going to stand up some servers. You'll notice some fingerprint dots here because this is actually some real Azure resources that we have at arcticit.com. So we go up there, we build out a server. We might do some work for some of our clients for some of the projects. If some of you are actually clients of ours already, we probably use some Azure resources to help get your project going. We wrap that up and then we'll move it to your environment once we're ready to go live in some cases. Or we might use it temporarily to build out some customization for you and then deprecate that server because we don't need it anymore. One of the cool things is we get to spin up the server when we need it and take it down when we don't. No hardware involved. So we get that compute power for when we need it because we have a burst requirement for you, and then take it down when we're done. This is just an example of what the virtual machine portal looks like in Azure. So now we want to prepare the environment. We're getting ready to do a move. So we're going to go up there, we're going to go through the calculator, we're going to spin up our machine, make that selection in the Azure portal, get it all set up, get it all configured, test it, make sure it's safe, and we're going to start moving some data up there, okay? So we want to perform that initial test, right? And here's an example of what the Office 365 Admin Center looks like. So if I'm moving your email, and everybody knows how critical your email is to you, trust us, we understand how important email is. People won't judge based upon the security of a solution. The end user is assuming you're making it secure. But if you don't have their email and their content moved correctly, man, you got a problem. Nobody ever comes down to IT and says, hey, I just wanted to stop in and say, you guys are awesome. Right now, they come down and they talk to IT or the consultant because something's broken, someone moved my cheese, I can't find it, where's my stuff? So before we move to production or all of our content from our on-premise location into the cloud for either that app or that infrastructure, we're going to move a little bit of it, test it out, get some end users in that test, and make sure that they can touch the stuff that they need, right? We want to make sure that we have that capability. And we're going to get it ready to move. So we're going to make sure that all the data we can move has been moved. In email, for example, you want to move all the email you can and maybe cut over on a midnight or a weekend because usage will be low and you don't want people to have any delay in the messages. You won't lose any messages, but you don't want to tell somebody on a Monday morning, hey, you're not going to get any email till noon. That would be bad, right? So data has been migrated, business interruption is mitigated. Regression means, hey, if something goes wrong, we have the ability to rewind and reset. That's regression. So we make sure that we have the ability to go back in case something goes wrong. Part of that is making sure that your backups are most recent and that they've been tested and that the training has been completed for the new applications you're going to use. All that stuff's done. It's all systems go. We launch. We're ready to go. Okay? After we're up there, we're live, everybody's rocking and rolling. Now we want to make sure that we can do a quality assessment, security review. We want to make sure that all that stuff is there. I included here something called the Azure Security Identity Score, which is where we manage Azure security for your identity. And then there's something called the Microsoft Secure Score, which is a Microsoft 365 component that tells you these are the things you need to change. These are the things you need to turn on to become more secure. For example, multi-factor authentication. When you sign into a SaaS application, sends you a code on your phone. One of the most secure things you could possibly do inside the cloud and any business application you have today. If you're not using multi-factor authentication, in other words, right now, if you're attending this Cloud 101 session with us, and you don't have multi-factor authentication to get into your line of business apps, call your IT person and say, hey, what do we need to do to turn on MFA, multi-factor authentication? It protects you, it protects your business, and it protects your customers. It can stop 99% of almost any kind of threat we face today from a cybersecurity perspective. Once we're in good shape, we've gone through, we've done the testing. Now we want to go ahead and we want to document what we've done. And we want to make sure that we have a scheduled maintenance environment. Believe it or not, even though we move stuff to the cloud, there are still maintenance tasks that have to occur. They're different in many respects, but we want to make sure that, for example, we're reviewing our billing. If we have resources that we can turn on and off depending on our needs, we want to make sure that we're actually doing that so we're not wasting money. We want to make sure that we're getting billed correctly, right? We want to make sure that we're getting billed correctly. And we want to make sure that if we no longer have infrastructure down here and it's up in the cloud, that our new documentation represents that. Because if we ever have a security issue, we want to be able to look at a picture and say, this is the landscape that we're looking at, and this is the security that we have in place. So the cloud still requires you to have maintenance and security and good documentation of your environment. It just moves it to a different spot and it changes the way you're able to interact with it. So one more recap: discover the customer's footprints, figure out what you have in place, map dependencies, recommend a path, move to production, test it, right? And then we're going to prepare everything and get it in place, all right? Conduct a quality after we move it up there, and then document and schedule maintenance so that we're keeping track of how we're using that new asset, okay? So a real world example. We did some work a while back for one of our clients, Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures. That's a tribal enterprise located in the northern Midwest. And good relationship with the customer. They're very forward thinking as far as how they leverage technology to extend their enterprise. And they created a corporate ventures type umbrella from a business perspective over their casinos. They have some hotels. They have some other for-profit or what we call non-gaming organizations, an NGO. And then they have other tribal government as a separate entity, right? So corporate ventures oversees all of their for-profit businesses. And one of the interesting things is as they started looking at needing to break off the infrastructure and have their own business to govern and oversee those for-profit entities, it was, okay, well, we have compliance from a state gaming perspective, compliance from tribal gaming, and then we have tribal health to be concerned with and tribal information. And we have these non-gaming organizations that aren't regulated by gaming and compliance. So the cloud became one of the most unique ways to not be on the enterprise infrastructure that was regulated by the casinos, have their own infrastructure in the cloud, have their own security and standards that integrates down into those compliant environments. Since their businesses were distributed throughout their geographic locale, they had the ability to be anywhere, anytime, any device, integrate their phones through it, and have all of that backed up and secured in one central location in the cloud without having to add additional infrastructure and complexity into their business. So that's just one example, a real world example of how we had a business that was traditionally all their eggs in one basket on premise inside a casino infrastructure, right? Where they had to step out of that, and the cloud was a logical way to do that. And this is a quote from one of our key resources there, Drew McElrath, their IT project manager. So we've talked about three different types of cloud: SaaS, IaaS, and PaaS. And then from a Microsoft perspective, inside their environment, they actually have three different cloud offerings. They have Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure. And to introduce that in a little bit more detail, I want to bring on our CIO, Phil Jackson.
Thanks, Dave. Well, as CIO, there's a lot that I think about, security, compliance, integration. And when you start talking about that Microsoft cloud, and we use all of these, there's no other cloud provider that has the breadth and depth that they do. From productivity suites to ERP applications to PaaS and IaaS, all of that is really tightly integrated and really secure in the Microsoft cloud. So let's talk about a few of those things. Microsoft 365, you get Windows 10, the most secure operating system that they've ever had. The Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive, so you talked about things anywhere, any place, anytime. Having that stuff in the cloud gives you the ability to collaborate and work on these things just anywhere, anytime. You and I worked on this presentation and collaborated on it simultaneously in real time. And that's not something you can only do in the cloud. It's where two people can be working on the document at the same time. In the situation we're in right now, that's really helpful. So we can work on things, you can work on it in your home and I can work on mine simultaneously, and we collaborate together. These powerful Microsoft productivity apps aren't going anywhere. People use them day in, day out to run their business. And who couldn't live without shared calendars, with Outlook and Exchange? It's so important to be able to collaborate and schedule time together. And then you have a lot of great mobile apps. Microsoft's come a long way with their mobility apps, Android apps and iOS apps. They're feature parity and they're secure. And then you bring in the Dynamics 365 component, so ERP and CRM that really drive your business. And again, that's integrated right within all of these other tools we just talked about. And you have that common data service Microsoft Power Platform. So one source of the truth. So as I'm writing all of this stuff, I have one source of the truth to look at. If I need to extend the functionality, there's full-featured APIs and integration tools in there. And then if I want to customize it, I have the virtual entity. So there's lots of ways to extend so that core software that drives your business, again, that's kind of that software as a service kind of component. But maybe I have things that don't fit into that software as a service mold. Maybe I've got a custom web application or a database application. Well, then I can bring in Azure, the Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform, and do that PaaS and IaaS. I can do database. I can do web servers. All of that stuff is available in the Azure Cloud Platform, and not just the Microsoft stack. You know, people go, oh, well, it's only Windows. No, you can run Linux. You can run any kind of virtual server in the Azure. Microsoft says all comers as it relates to Azure. And it's security first. They employ over 2,000 security professionals. You can't get this level of security. You can't hire those people. The best and brightest are working at Microsoft on the security. And then lifecycle services. So you have continuous operations. Again, all of these are always on the latest and greatest technology. You're always up to date on latest and greatest technology. And as you talked about earlier, it can grow with you. So you can buy little today and just with a couple of clicks of a button, upgrade that server. We do that all the time and inside our own environment. Someone's like, hey, we've kind of reached capacity. This is performing slow. As you know, in 5 minutes, we have a brand new server spun up with the same application on it. It's amazing.
One of the cool things, Phil, too, is that in all three of those cloud type services from this provider, my Active Directory account, right, my username and password that I log into my business's, assets from, that one username and password, that identity, right, that identity is able to access all of these different environments. So I'm managing security centrally, and then opening up these assets to my users from a security perspective from the cloud. And I'm able to monitor and protect their usage as well so that they can't be compromised. So if they lose a mobile phone or they lose a laptop, we can shut down cloud access for their account, get them a new machine, no harm, no foul. All their stuff is encrypted and protected in that cloud environment. So this is those three clouds together, which just really creates a whole different value perspective and trust. And that's really the big word that I hear from you, Phil, all the time is trust. Do we trust that this service, this provider is protecting this information more than if we were protecting it ourselves? Not that we don't trust the individuals that we have protecting our information, but do we trust the service more than we trust ourselves to have that thorough compliance because of the service level agreement or that SLA that the cloud service provides, right?
Yeah. Azure AD processes 12 times more logins per day than the next identity service out there. So they are, from the security, from the trust, and we know if we need to separate with someone or something like that, we can turn off one account, that one identity, and everything is shut down. So that integration is really tight. And then let's talk about the modern workplace delivered is all of these things. Again, the Microsoft Cloud Platform, there's just no other where you can get Office productivity suites, software as a service, and platform as a service all in one place. There's not that place. So we talked about collaboration. We talked about sharing calendars. We use a lot of Teams in our organization, and that really helps, again, in this remote world that we live in right now. That helps us really collaborate together. We can use Power BI to report and get real-time analytics. Power Apps, we have Power Apps that we've built for our internal folks and team members. And all of that is available on anything, anytime. It's pull up your phone, pull up your iPad, pull up your laptop, it works. So ultimately, it saves us time, money, and resources with cloud technology and security at scale. None of this matters if you're not secure. And we know that we can trust Microsoft.
Very good. Thank you very much, Phil. So As we look at modern workplace and we look at the current situation we find ourselves in, hopefully today gave you a little bit of knowledge about just some basics of the cloud. It's not just something attached to your iPhone or your Droid. It is a business world out there of applications and infrastructure. The same way the electric company gives electricity to your house is the same way that the cloud provides compute resources to your business and you personally as a consumer. Right? So one of the cool things here is when we go through this with our clients, a lot of times they don't know how to start that conversation. So what we're doing right now is we're offering a 2-hour technical conversation from our technical leadership to yours and or your business area. So even if you're not in the IT space, but you want to talk about a cloud opportunity that you think you have, and maybe it's just to help you communicate better to IT, that's something that we'll take on as well. Let us know. You know, we've come out of this before. We've helped businesses migrate through many different changes over our years in business. Take us up on our offer. Let us know if you want us to help discuss what the cloud might mean, where you can get started. If you're interested, go ahead and send a message to connect@ardicit.com. So we did mention this earlier. The anniversary of Prince's passing, I think, was either yesterday or the day before. We have the artist formerly known as Prince. If anybody ever missed it, he became a symbol and got rid of his name. It was somewhat entertaining back in the day. Microsoft 365 business applications is now what Office 365 has become. So it's now Microsoft 365. It includes the Office applications that you're familiar with. All right, so, and there are some opportunities to take advantage of Teams for free for a period of 6 months. If you want to know how to take advantage of some of that, again, shoot us a message at connect@ardicit.com. And with that, we'll open it up to some questions. I don't know if you got any questions quite yet, Joanne.
Thanks, Dave. No, we'll give it a few minutes though to see if some come in, but not as of yet.
Okay.
That's a great presentation.
All right, any questions you have, of course, you can send that to connect@ardicit.com and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. We'll give it another minute, see if there's any questions that we can answer for you.
I think we're good. Oh, wait, one question did come in. How long is a typical migration?
Oh, good question. So if we're just migrating a small business application, for example, say it's you want to move payroll from something that you were doing on premise to the cloud. Timing of that, you want it to be at like a quarter end or a year end. It might take us a month and a half to help you move to that, depending on the provider. If we're moving your email and your exchange is kind of like your local post office for your business that gets housed. Depending on how many users you have, that would typically, dictate how long it's going to take to move that service to the cloud. Could be a few weeks, could be a month, depending on the size. If we're moving some of your infrastructure, it could take anywhere from 30 to 60 days. If you remember those steps in the process, we want to identify what we're moving, why we're moving it, how we're going to move it, what's it going to affect in the business. Get that environment set up once the determination is made, do a little testing, do some data migration, make sure everything's good, and then we do that production move. Depending on the availability of your own internal IT resources or the size of your department, or if you even have an IT department at all, will dictate how quick we can get that done. If they need to participate, which is always a good thing, that way they can help support it when it goes farther, we might stretch out that project scope so that they have the ability to work it into their normal day. Remember, one of the key elements here is not to interrupt the business. So when we can get your attention is when we'll work with you to get it done. Some people, have us just say, hey, move this up there, let us know when it's done, and then come back and train us. Depends on the kind of workload we're moving. So, your mileage may vary, I guess, is the easiest answer, but depends on the complexity of what we're going to move to that cloud.
Okay, great. Great question. One more came in. Thank you very much. Would you have someone show up on site for the current assessment?
It depends, geographically, the size of the opportunity. If it's a small opportunity, most likely that 2-hour session can be done through Teams. Currently, right now, no, we will not come on site. No, we're not allowed to. But if you wanted to have a team session, cameras on, we can go face to face and get it done that way. If it's a sizable opportunity, and we also have to assess your physical infrastructure, an on-site visit is almost required to do a formal assessment. Typically, that's going to be something bigger than 2 hours. But for the right opportunity, we would be able to come on site, assuming all of this red tape is lifted from us and it's safe to travel again. So.
Great. And it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in.
All right. Well, it's right at the top of the hour. I know you like it when I get done right on time, Joan. So.
Again, Dave and Phil, thanks. That was great. And like Dave said, if you have any questions, you can follow up with Dave or Phil or also myself. Just reach out to us with any questions.
All right. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.